Hi, this is Paul. One of the things I'm always trying to do is get a language handle on something. And sort of metagelical came out of that. God number one and God number two, all the different things that I've sort of put out and that I don't really have a glossary for. But I think AI search engines will probably help as they continue to sort of chew through the transcripts of my videos, maybe at least help find videos that have some of these things in them at some point. So there's upsides to this AI stuff too. Recently, I've sort of been evolving a language about the kinds of biases that are in us. And so I'm going to call, I don't know if I'll call the video this because the title might change by the end of the video. My videos are that poorly planned out. I start the video with one idea and I end with another idea sometimes, but it's the first filter, fallacy, and necessity. What do I mean by first filter? Well, in some ways, the recent tariffs have been a really incredible illumination of this dynamic, both in its expression and in its scrambling. So the first filter is like this. John Vervaeke, when he talks about relevance realization, makes the comment that your biases and your relevance realization are really one of the same thing. That this has to do with combinatorial explosiveness. What do I mean by that? There's going to be a whole bunch of terms in this video. That the world is too big for us to take in. This is one of the big reasons for Peterson, Peugeot, Vervaeke, everything that we've been talking about in the last number of years. The realization that cognitive scientists and robotics people and AI people, that you can't just slap cameras on top of a computer and have it see. Over the last 10 years, we all have these cars now that have cameras, and those cameras are looking for the lines on the road to have lane keeping, as the cars say. Those cameras are starting to see. What do you have to do in order for those cameras to see? You have to reduce the world down into something, a small enough thing so that it's productive. Now, in many ways, this is downstream from the scientific method, which was also a reduction of the world down to just one or two little limited variables, so you can just do all this little A/B testing, try and build up from there. The world is too complex for it, so a good bit of what our brains do is reduce the world. This was a lot of what Jordan Peterson was trying to talk about with Sam Harris in their first conversation on stage in Seattle. And Sam didn't really want to go there. But if the world is too big, and a lot of what we do is reduce it down to the sizes and the limitations by which we can productively engage it, that means that we outsource. So we talked about combinatorial explosiveness. Now we're going to talk about collective cognition. What do I mean by collective cognition? We do our thinking, our cognition, through other people. We do it together. And we have to do it together because the world is so massive, so we sort of, not formally, directly, but we sort of delegate the cognition and our interaction with the world out to other people. In many ways, this is the most basic level of this, we would say, is our religion. You could use worldview or other words for it, but the basic frame, so we've talked about the frame problem before, the basic frame through which we interpret the world. Now, we reduce the world, and the way we connect with other people, our networking with other people, is we trust them. So trust is basically in the computer network that here I have at church that connects me up to the internet and to a server, and the network that connects me up to power to the electrical grid here at SMUD, and that all these networks, electricity is flowing over those networks. What flows over our networks is trust. Trust is like the electricity. That's what connects us with others. If we are in a trust relationship with someone, they then have influence. So once there's trust, then you can have influence. So we outsource a lot of our cognition, and we do this actually historically. Many of us have outsourced our cognition to people long since dead. Just generation after generation after generation. Great chains of trust and cognition. It's part of the reason the family is so important. If you have a healthy family, the family is trustworthy. I've played this clip before. I will play it again. This is a super important clip in terms of understanding basic humanity.
I know this is going to fly in the face of what people want to hear. So this is scientific work done by atheists. Just to be clear, okay? The thing that makes you a theist or an atheist is not how analytic your thinking is, or how emotional or intuitive your thinking is, contrary to what we believe. In fact, there are weird correlations. Your country is one of the weird correlations. It's usually the United States that's the weird correlation. But the UK is the weird correlation in that religiosity and analytic thought are actually positively correlated with each other, which is contrary to the typical atheist story that people are religious because they're not capable of good analytic reflective thought. That's not what drives what religion people take up, or whether, or if they become atheists or not, contrary to what we like to tell ourselves in our own ego-stroking autobiographies. What is the most overwhelming predictor, and it's not poverty or other things we've been told since the Enlightenment, the overwhelming predictor is, what are the people in your life that you regard as credible? And this has a specific meaning, which means they do what are called credibility-enhancing displays, which is the following. They do something that you don't understand, but because you trust them and you've seen their wisdom, you are willing to imitate them to see if they can open your eyes to something. And before you think that's stupid, that's how kids work. Because that's our biggest advantage over chimps, is we trust our adults way more. And that's how come we're capable of culture. So what predicts what your kids will be is the degree to which you do credibility-enhancing displays that they don't initially understand, but they are willing to imitate because they trust and love you, that will actually form them.
And then those displays pan out. What I mean by panning, and it's sort of a rough draft sort of ways, those displays bring on, by and large, on the whole, this is very dead reckoning, this is very rough draft, good things, not bad things, over the longest term possible. And we're all fallible in doing that. But again, that trust is so critical. And so what John is saying is that for children, their first filter is their parents. There's this great little video. I'll see if I can find it. I think I grabbed it. Try to grab a lot, but I don't always grab everything. It's a great little video of a toddler. This is a young child, maybe 4, maybe a little older than a toddler. A 4-year-old watching a sports event with his father. And the 4-year-old has now picked up that it's not quite clear, I don't remember what sports event it was, if the puck goes in the goal, or the ball goes in the basket, or the football goes into the end zone, that the father cheers. But now it's a little confusing because there's 2 teams. And so, they're in different colors and so to watch. And so the kid has sort of figured this out. And so at this moment, the ball went in the hoop or whatever. And the little kid cheers and the father goes like this. And the little kid looks at the father and the kid goes from cheering to this right away. Okay? So that kid's father is the first filter. And the reason it's necessary and also fallacious, potentially, is that the kid needs a first filter. The kid has to have the cognition of the world through the parent. And that's why good parenting is such a huge blessing. And bad parenting is such a huge liability. Because that parent is the first filter. Now, as people become adults, that doesn't end. They continue to need a first filter. But what's been happening in this distributed world of politics and screens is that increasingly our first filters are not personal relationships. They're, look at the common ones right now. Donald Trump, good or bad. Again, they're super low resolution. They have to be. The world sort of starts out with a binary, and you sort of have to choose which way to go. So good, bad, right, wrong, thumbs up, thumbs down. Super simple. But that's just the beginning, of course, and then lots more decisions along the way happen. So everybody has first filters, and these first filters are contextual. Because, again, if you look at what Elizabeth was talking about context collapse, all of our knowledge is contextual. And that little boy watching the game is either cheering or putting his head in his hands. He's trying to decipher the clues, the uniforms, the where the ball is or the puck and the relation to the field. It's all contextual. And so everybody needs first filters, but our first filters have liabilities. Now, right now, a common first filter in America is Donald Trump, the most famous, polarizing, biggest president of my lifetime in many ways. Bigger than Ronald Reagan, bigger than Richard Nixon. I mean, Donald Trump just is able to own the media landscape. However you think about him, he owns the media landscape like no other president I've ever seen in my lifetime in American history, and probably no other president has ever. Now, in the future, who knows? But because that itself is a question, is that good or bad? So he announces these tariffs, and of course, Wall Street tanks right away. But this has sort of scrambled things because Dems and Republicans, right or left, Christian or non-Christian, and then within the Christian tribe, Catholic or not Catholic, Orthodox or not Orthodox, Reformed or not Reformed. I mean, it's all these little binaries it starts. And they're necessary because we have to invest ourselves in something. And these are sort of broad forks in the road that help us figure out, do we go here or do we go there? And then once you get to that, there's other forks. Okay, Donald Trump, yes or no? What do you trust him for? What don't you trust him for? And so this tariff moment is a great example of this. And I'm old enough and have been paying attention enough in a lot of ways to see so many of these things have been scrambled. I grew up, Ron Sider was a very big deal when I was growing up. Rich Christians in an age of hunger. And before the whole vegan thing was popular, then like in the 90s and in the aughts, Christians were eating less meat to save the planet because, you know, all that grain getting eaten by cows, producing a little bit amount of beef, well, that grain should be just going out to feed people. And so Ron Sider had all kinds of things, and it was basically about Christian austerity. Capitalism was bad. American consumerism was bad. Growing was bad. You know, you can see a fair amount of this in sort of Paul King's North Now, because that's a similar thing. I mean, his reaction is sort of the industrialization of the ecological movement, and he's more on the Jimmy Carter side when, hey, we're having the oil embargo. Don't turn the thermostat up, put on a sweater. And of course, Americans didn't like to hear that. They much preferred Ronald Reagan. And so I was very much grew up in the put on a sweater tribe, eat less meat tribe, scale down. All of this stuff is bad. And you know what happens? We send these we send these jobs overseas where there are poor environmental controls, where there isn't good labor conditions. This globalization is a bad, bad thing, Christians said. And so I'm just amazed watching many Christians who back in the day were Ron Sider type of Christians. Now, these tariffs are horrible because we're refusing to love our neighbors well. And it's like, wait a minute. I thought we were giving them the crap jobs. I thought we were polluting their countries. When I eventually went to the Dominican Republic, there were these things called zona francas. And zona francas were free zones. And basically these were little industrial places in the Dominican Republic where multinationals would come in and they would set up their little factory, and they'd have lower labor costs because the Dominican Republic was cheaper, and Dominicans would really go for working in these places. Now, again, they're just all trade-offs with respect to this, because on one hand, well, this was just sort of globalized, Americanized, sweatshop-ish, but often the labor conditions in the Zona Francas were a little bit better. Often the wages were a little bit better. They actually got paid on time, and you could have relationships with, let's say, a Dominican boss who sort of like a Jim Crow sharecropper could sort of string you along. And what was amazing is that this valence from conservative, serious Christians who are concerned about the poor, all of these things that are sort of coded left, somehow are now coded right. And I've been watching, the codes are just all over the place. When Trump is this Republican is a labor president, and right now you can find lots of YouTubes, with Republicans that were never Trumpers, but, Ben Shapiro talking about free trade. I expect Ben Shapiro to talk about free trade, but of course, and so all of this stuff has just been scrambled. But to me, it just illuminates the first filter problem that we all have. And it's a problem and it's a necessity. It's both of them, because you need a first filter. But we're living in an age when so many of our first filters are being scrambled, and that people find really disturbing because they don't know what to do. And so then they sort of go out and they have a transformation and they have a new first filter. So maybe they got red pilled or they got changed in some other way. And well, now they've got a new first filter. Now they used to be an atheist and now they're a Christian, or they're this kind of Christian, or they're that kind of Christian. So they have a new first filter, and then the other filters down the road. And so I think it's actually a good thing to think about. Ask yourself the question what your first filter is. If you watch almost any Glenn Scrivener video, he will tell you basically that, of course, Jesus is all things through Jesus. So Glenn Scrivener sort of wants to, let's make Jesus the first filter. And of course, it's kind of a thing you would expect Christians to believe. I was watching the Mary Harrington, Jonathan Peugeot thing, and I noticed, and
dance, it's going to be just a really incredible.
So there's basically an in-house ad for an event, an Orthodox Arts Festival. And so for a lot of people, Orthodox, now it's really interesting because I watched this and it's like, what does it mean that Orthodox becomes a brand? And this is where you get the subtle Americanization of things, where Orthodox in this context becomes a brand. Well, what do you mean by Orthodox? Do you mean Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Antiochian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox? Well, Orthodox as brand. Well, how does that fit in the brand? But again, it's sort of a first filter, and then Orthodox good or Orthodox bad. And we're in an age when there's just a lot of scrambling of new first filters. So I wanted to get that language out there. I'm going to be using that language because I'm probably going to be using that language because it's a super helpful thing to say, okay, well, this person's first filter seems to be this, at least in these contexts. Then people might perspect, no, my first filter is Jesus, or my first filter is reason, or my first filter is science, or my first filter is mom, or, whatever. So first filter fallacies and necessities. There it is. So leave a comment. Tell me what you think about the language.